Hey, everybody, you're listening and watching the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Bill Zanowitz,
I'm Brian Pittard.
I'm Steve Morey.
I'm Caleb Alexander McKenzie.
and we are your heavy homos who read comics and talk about comics, but you don't have to be a heavy homo to listen in or watch it. I'm still getting used to this video component. And a couple months ago, we had John Horsley, who had put together the Eins anthology. And John has a podcast network that grew out of his Spoiler Country podcast, which is the Spoilerverse. And we're very happy to have one of the Spoilerverse cohorts with us tonight, Greg Smith. And Greg's going to talk about a very prescient charitable initiative. I get to say charitable initiative. I'm so happy. So happy about that. So Greg, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing good.
Oh, I didn't get it. That it's count as cow. I just said cow, and now I get it. Oh, geez. Okay.
There's some really cool Pee Wee stuff around. I just love it. I love it.
I was like, oh, you got a nice cow there. You can't pass anything up on me there. So Greg, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your project?
All right. So my name is Greg Smith. I am, as you said, I'm one of John's cohorts on Spoilerverse. I have a podcast or three on there. They are Narrative Gunslingers, the podcast about storytelling and looking in the narratives of different stories with creators. And the newly branded Funny Book Forensics, which is delving into the history and just chopping up comic books. And then also the Nerds from the Crypt, which is folding into the fold, which is a horror review, if you will. So we talk about horror comics, horror movies, video games, Kickstarters, and other things like that. And we're all part of the Spoilerverse.
Okay, and why don't you tell us about the project that you're going to be shepherding there?
All right, so Heroes Need Masks is a project that my friend Eddie Headington had started to put together, and it is a comic book anthology for raising money for GetUsPPE, which is a getting personal protective equipment for our healthcare heroes out there on the front lines. Basically what we're trying to do and what we've been doing is compiling stories from creators around the country, around the world, going out and finding stories that either they have had in their back stock, comic book short stories, comic strips, poems, other things like that, prose pieces, and putting them all together in a nice little anthology, and then putting that out there for to raise funds for this GetUsPPE organization. So we want to figure right now this is going to be a situation that is probably going to be ongoing, and we're seeing a lot of different people on the front lines that are going to different measures where they're at, depending on if they have the protective equipment or if they don't, and they're using garbage liners and other things like that. And people are pitching in around the country, around the world to get things for people, making masks and face masks, shields and other things like that. But if we can, as comic book creators, can kind of put our resources together and put our art out there and our creative stories and get that out there to raise them some money as well, then it's the least we can do.
All right, and how's this going to be formatted? Is this going to be an online thing or an actual anthology book? Is this going to be a Kickstarter campaign?
So
what form does it take?
We're looking at doing it right now as a purely digital. So trying to do it as a contactless book, if you will. So people can donate for this book, and they can get it in a digital format. And then later on, if we continue to do this in the future, there might be a version that is something that somebody can have as a tangible copy in their hands. But right now, it's going to be all digital. We're looking into running it as a Kickstarter. We've done, as Eddie's done, different types of charitable things in the past through Kickstarter. We're just trying to make sure that all our all our T's are crossed and all our I's are dotted along the lines of what the Kickstarter processes are. This is one of the situations where they've got a lot of different things that come into play for these types of things. So we're going to try to make sure that we've had very good luck on Kickstarter. Eddie's run Kickstarter campaigns in the past that have been successful. I myself just came off of one right before during this whole outbreak of the pandemic, and it also was highly successful during this time frame. Surprisingly to my team and people that were in support of us. But it's one of those things where we've seen how this format and this platform is a very good way to do that. We also looked into the other options out there for other fundraising formats as well, to see if we have another way to do that as well.
Okay. Now, when we have a guest come onto our show, we're kind of like Loverboy and start from the start in terms of questions that we throw at you. So first one at you, outside of the project that you mentioned, how did you first get into comics?
Like, how did I first get into like reading comics?
Yeah,
like
you can do both reading and creating.
Okay.
Yep.
So I would say, like, as a kid, I was undiagnosed, later diagnosed dyslexic. So comics were one of those things that my dad threw into my hands to help me pass classes, because I wasn't able to read at the level that all the other kids were reading, because everybody either thought like, oh, hey, this guy isn't picking up the language. He's not reading or anything the way that everyone else is. But it was really, I just couldn't put the words together because I was seeing everything backwards. And that wasn't until I was in high school that was diagnosed. Talk about a giant gap in time frame.
Yeah.
So my dad at 7 is giving me every single comic book that you can find that is really to whatever the core study is for first, second, third grader, be it Robinson Crusoe or whatever. But I was getting all those books and getting that information and that education through that. So how did I get into creating comics? Oh no, my dogs are barking. I'm sorry. I just heard it.
They want to interject. Yeah.
They want to interject. I'm so sorry, barking dogs. See, I'm even dyslexic when I talk. So how did I get into the creation of comics? That was a totally one of those backwards kind of weird, unexpected turns of life, and the wheel of fortune, if you will. My writing partner from college and I have been writing stories and submitting to various in college, trying to make a break in TV and film writing since the early 2000s. And we've been writing and writing. And we got to this point in our writing career where we're like, okay, and then a giant writer strike happens, and we decide to step back from writing completely. And we both go off do our separate things. And he finds a really cool hobby, which is roller derby. And I find that, we talked about circus people before, but I do come from circus people. That's why so I went off to be a clown, and I was off doing my clown bit and all, and I got injured and laid up, and I started to shoot my buddy Mike, who was doing his roller derby thing, a bunch of random text messages and stuff like that, because I hurt my back and I was laid up and I couldn't move for a year. And he was always responsive and stuff. And one day he starts responding back to this one text message, and it just continues to go into we start writing this whole entire story. Unbeknownst to me, while he's on his roller derby journeys, he's riding in a car with a guy who is leaving Hollywood, who knew who we might have been from our writing experience in the past, and was leaving that industry to move into comic books and develop comics for ONI Press. and he was asking Mike about what kind of pitches would he have that he could take to the new publisher he was going to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when Mike and I started to talk about all these different things. And lo and behold, our first book, Junior Braves of the Apocalypse, a young adult graphic novel series, was formulated based off of a bunch of random text messages that I kept sending him, and a weird hobby, a fun hobby that he had, that he was like, you know what, I'm gonna go do this, and just a random occurrence of being in the right car at the right time. So.
Okay, cool. I tend to bogart the interviews, so I'm going to deliberately try not to do that. Since the person that's up on the view here that is probably the most charitably aligned member of our group right now is Caleb. So Caleb, I have the interview baton. I'm throwing it over to you.
All right. So for starters, as somebody who's married to a nurse, my partner is one of those people who's on the front lines. He's a RN who works. That's where he's at right now. Thank you, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. The fact that people have gone above and beyond to kind of make up for what the people who are in charge have not been able to do or have not been willing to do, in some sense, is amazing. But on that note, and this kind of goes back to the Kickstarter and stuff. I know a lot of places are having trouble actually getting their hands on the PPE. Have you guys found a resource for that? Are you set up to go on that?
So the organization that we're working with, that we'd like to put all of the funding that we get into GetUsPPE.org, is they have gone through sort of and they're looking towards all of that. They're finding those pathways into getting their hands on the we're not professionals that can get it for the people that need it. So
I was just kind of curious, because that's one of the, I know that bridge is hard to cross sometimes. In comics, unfortunately, the comics community has had the opportunity the past few years to kind of rally together and to produce some of these anthology books for different things. The Where We Live anthology for Las Vegas, and the Love is Love anthology, of course, for Orlando. Have you reached out, or have you heard from any of the people who kind of ran those anthologies and connected with them?
So most recently, there was a anthology that was done for the fires in Australia. There was a couple of fundraisers for that, and one of my friends put me in touch with a couple of the creators that worked with them to just kind of get some guidance as to what we're doing and give us some of the resources in case Kickstarter doesn't work out. So that's why we've been looking at the different avenues for fundraising and other things, just to make sure our bases are covered in case one thing falls through, that we can still be able to push forward with the project and make sure that we can raise this money. Because it was one of those things, like I can tell you, when Eddie brought this to me and wanted to know if I'd be interested in putting a story into the thing, I was like, well, what all have you gotten, and where are you going, and how are you going about all this? And I started asking a lot of questions, and he was like, you sound like you want to be more involved than just putting a story in. And I was like, and we started talking, and I was already in the mindset of doing a Kickstarter for raising money for, not necessarily, it was interesting because, like, with the pivot of the industry, the way that it all changed back in the beginning of March, when the other Kickstarter that I was working on, we had planned a whole entire comic book convention circuit to go and launch and promote our Kickstarter for our book. And in the interim, my writing partner and I changed our pie format to make sure that instead of doing anything for ourselves and anything that we were doing, we just wedged out everything to make sure that the production of the book was possible, and everything went to our artist to make sure he was taken care of, because he lost all of his revenue for the next unforeseeable future. So I was already in that mindset, and I was already on that like hustle trail, if you will. So when Eddie came to me with this, I was like, this is like exactly the thing that I've been telling people on podcasts that we should be doing, is making sure that we're looking out for people that either need help or how to get people help. That, and this is definitely one of those things that we need to do. And it was a no-brainer for me. You know, it was like, if my parents were here, this would be something that they would be involved in. So they would want to.
Awesome.
Thanks. So it's just one of those things. It's like, you see a problem and you can't not be part of the solution if you can, you know. So sorry.
No, not at all. So, I mean, so many people, and as Bill said, I'm involved with a nonprofit here where I'm at in Little Rock called The Van. We work with helping people who are experiencing homelessness. But so many people don't default to that mindset. They don't default to that, oh, there's a problem that I can see, I've got to go, I can be a solution. They don't understand that it takes the hands-on mechanics of that. So I mean, the fact that you like, that was your default, is to like know that was what you wanted to do, and to kind of pitch in and start grinding those gears and turning that wheel, that says a lot about you. And I think, again, that speaks to a lot about the comics community in general, and how willing we are as both fans and artists and writers and podcasters, to reach out and to really take charge with that.
Yeah, it's amazing to see how much people have come together to help out the different creators. One, like on one aspect, help out different creators, you know, when they need stuff, but then also to take a look at the different things, like you're saying, when there's a situation and people lean in on each other, and they can make a difference, and they can really support a community. And like, if a community's been hurt by something, and they can turn in on each other, and they can see something good out of whatever they're creating, and see a way to make something better, and to get that message out there, whatever it is, through their comics or through their creations, through their podcast, and just get that to strengthen the signal, then it speaks volumes to what we as a group of people can do, versus when someone has an idea. And that was when I saw Eddie with his idea. I was like, well, I know John, and I know these people, and you know, we just started just throwing stuff out there, and it just became a bigger thing. And then, you know, it became not just Eddie trying to do this. It became Eddie and I, and then Eddie and John, and the Spoilerverse, and then everyone else that was involved. And then we started to we literally within 2 weeks, we had an outpouring of creators coming together and saying, we want to throw in these stories and these previously done cartoons and comic strips and other things like that we've got. So it was just amazing. Like, I was so surprised that it would pour in so quick. And I'm just like, and he's like, I'm ready to start putting this all together this weekend. So I was just like, okay. So,
Caleb, I don't know what that was. Okay.
It's not me this week. Usually I'm the transformer in the crew.
Yeah. All right, Caleb, you're finishing up your heat, and you're going to be passing that baton over to Bryan. Bryan, what do you have there?
So I'm interested in your Spoiler Country podcast. Did I get that right? Spoiler Country?
So Spoiler Country is John's podcast.
Oh, okay.
Spoilerverse is the all-inclusive umbrella.
So
we'll
talk about one of your shows. I'm interested to see like other creative efforts that you're involved in.
Okay.
Like what else are you really excited about right now and want to share?
All right. So let's see. So the Teen Newer podcast that I'm working on right now, Narrative Gunslingers, came out of the previous Kickstarter that I was working on. That is a Starlight comic, and my co-writer Travis and I, on the promotion trail for Starlight, we were doing a couple podcasts, and Travis was like, "Hey, this is kind of fun. We could probably do a podcast." And I was like, "Well, I already am on a podcast. It takes some time." And he was like, "Oh no, it's great. We just do this thing. And I mean, just a little bit of time." And I'm like, "It for every hour, it's a couple hours outside of the podcast, do the podcast, and then all the promotion and everything. Oh, no, it'll be fun. Okay. He sold me on the fact that we would be able to make a podcast to promote the Kickstarter, to promote the rest of the comic book series that we were kickstarting, and also get people to come together for more discussion on storytelling and other things like that. And we would be able to talk to some friends that we know in the industry, but also bring in people that were truly excited to talk to those folks as well as other, third chairs, and being part of the podcast as well for moving forward as we jumped into our second book of the series. So I was like, okay, well, I guess that'd be fun and neat. So we started to pull that all together, and we brought John in as one of our guests off the top, and it was probably the best worst episode to have somebody that does podcast on the show, because we started off the show. It was a mess technically from the beginning. Things just fell apart. The recording, I clicked something on the keyboard that I had set up on my lap, which turned off the whole entire thing. And at the end of it, Travis and I were like, "We're really sorry. I'll clean this all up later on." And John was like, "Oh, that was really fun. Maybe this might fit into what I got going on over at Spoiler Country, or over at Spoilerverse." But really, what it is that we do is we invite somebody on that has read something, or watched a movie, or listened to a song or a poem that's really influenced them in their creative endeavors, and then talk to them about what that is, have them discuss it at a length to a point to where we all understand it, and then we kind of dig a little bit deeper into it and chop it up a little bit, or as Travis and I like to say, we sling some guns with them. And sometimes Travis might shoot some holes in the narrative of the story, and sometimes I like to come back up with the band-aids and put some band-aids on there. But we've had some really fun episodes. We talked to a lot of different creators and podcasters and stuff, writers, musicians, producers, various folks from all over the place. And it's been fantastic to be able to meet these people online and know that if we see them later on, we're going to have great interaction as well. So, I mean, it just always feels that way.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think when you were talking about your horror stories there, I think, what is it? 3 of us have run our own podcasts now. And I think all of us have had those kind of moments.
Yeah. Steve's the only bystander.
Oh,
hey, I would have my own individual podcast going on. I've played around with the idea for a while, but I mean,
you're doing the right thing, Steve. You're doing the right thing.
There's a lot of work that goes into it, and so much can go wrong. So, if you're able to get it working and moving, exactly.
But I love that idea because, like, was it not Thrilling Adventure Hour, but one of the guys from that had this great interview series for a while, and I think it was the same idea, like reaching out to industry people, whoever he could find, and kind of really built out sort of like an interesting format, and then like helped his writing a lot, and he's talked about this, and also built sort of some of his career and networking stuff. So I mean, it's like all of that is such a great, and it's a great resource for creative types. I mean, I love listening to any kind of process or deconstruction type podcast. I mean, that's a lot of what I listen to, other than like random politics stuff. But that's awesome though. It's we got to just share that. I've been putting I put the hashtag on our video chat for GetUsPPE. So if you get this, get me those links. We'll put them all out there.
Well, if you like to mix your politics and your comics, then the funny book forensics might be your jam too.
Oh yeah, excellent.
I definitely want to listen to that.
That's me and my high school buddy just talking about. We go through our long boxes and pull up old back issues and stuff like that of things that we've read or things that we want to make the other one take a better look at, and just chop them up and take a look at the art, take a look at the dialogue, take a look at the narrative, take a look at the story, take a look at everything, and really just see how it all fits into the different aspects of it there. The last couple episodes we talked a lot about Green Lantern, talked about the idea of throwaway characters and how you've got different and where they all fit in, and how different storylines cross and whatnot. So it's always fun, and it's neat to hear his perspective as a grown up, and my perspective as a grown up, as opposed to what we talked about when we were in high school. So driving around, coming back from the comic book store, and grabbing a Slurpee or something like that, and just like sitting in the back of the International Scout, just like talking about the comic books. So that's that.
Okay, so Bryan, your heat is finished, and Steve usually runs the first, but this time he's the clutch runner. So Steve, the baton goes over to you.
I pulled a hammy. Hey, I love hearing about different shows that you're working on, but I definitely want to go back to the Kickstarter. And you mentioned there's going to be a lot of different contributors, different types of contributions. So some prose, some more comic work. Have you gotten together sort of like a good list of contributors and whatnot for the project already?
It's a secret. It's a secret. No, it's so Eddie's been putting it together. It's not ready for release right now. I know once we get the information together for the actual if it's a Kickstarter or if it's another type of fundraising format, we'll have all that information on there. I can tell you that we have people from the video game industry, people from comic book industry, people from various industries, some prose writers and poets and stuff like that, working on various stories and various pieces that are going to fit into this project. So you're getting a little bit of everything. That's the best part about anthologies, is it's like getting a stew for your brain.
No, that's really great. Having a lot of people from a lot of different, I guess, representing a lot of different industries coming together for a common cause is always amazing. And like I think we've mentioned before, there's been some projects very similar to like this to this in very recent tragedies and difficulties. Obviously, what's happening now is something that we haven't seen for about 100 years.
Yeah.
And back then, I don't think anybody was putting together comic book compilations for this type of project for supporting people who are on the front lines and taking care of this, but also for those of us who may not know the best way to support people or how to get either funds or just be able to support initiatives like this. I think this is really great. And is there a plan potentially? Obviously, we're hoping that that the quarantine time ends soon, and I know across the country there'll be some staggered openings. But if this were to continue into the fall, would there be potentially a possibility of a follow-up project as well?
Yes, that's one of the things Eddie and I talked about when he pitched this idea to me. He followed it up once I said I was interested, and he started to kind of feel out the interest that I had. He asked me how interested and would I be interested in going further if needed. And I was like, what do you mean further if needed? Further if needed, like you're expecting this to go longer? And he said, yeah. And I said, definitely, because we both live with people who are at high risk. We care about people that have those needs. I have an 88-year-old grandmother. He has a newborn child and family members that are in those categories. I've got friends that work in healthcare and whatnot. So it's like it's a win-win, or it's a thing that you have to you just, it's like you can't not do this.
Yeah.
You know, and whatever the time frame is, if we have to keep going and we do another book, when he said that was something that he was looking at the horizon, I was like, well, that's not an option. So well, I did my part on book 1. Thank you very much. I'll see you later. You know, you have to see it through. So whatever it is.
Well, that's you know, and that's a good point. And actually, you know, if you do go into a second volume or even a third volume, would there be the possibility of going back? Because I know this is all digital.
Mm-hmm.
The possibility of going back and maybe recompiling in a printed format, maybe.
That's definitely something we could do. That's definitely something that we would definitely look into. That also would be something that would be dually beneficial for if we did printing locally. Then we would be stimulating our local economy by making sure that those people are getting those jobs, getting that into a print house that can go and print those books and get it right back out. You know, again, it's like Eddie and I have done our own self-published items and stuff in the past, and we know that there's definitely a cost to doing it in that way, but at the same point, it's worth the cost. If that, you know, if you're making sure that the people in your area are getting taken care of, then that's why you do it. That's one of the things we did in our previous Kickstarter. We built it in that it was going to be print on demand at a local shop, and making sure that we were taking care of so all the books were printed there, all the posters and other things like that, everything that needed to be printed was all being done or will be done in a local shop. So, and that happens to be, you know, the same way we're looking at this as well for stuff like that. So it's one of those things where it's like, if you can help in any way, shape, or form, and any, you know, for any aspect of things. One of the things we haven't talked about is my wife and I, we have a small business. So I see this from that perspective as well. So like owning a small shop, you see like the fact that like everything's shut down and you're like not able to go and be with your customers, have your customers come to you, do all these things. So you do everything like as much as you can through mail. And as soon as the doors can open, again, you don't want to be the first to open the doors, right? So, but you want to be able to give them whatever they need. And that's one of the things we're looking at is like, you know, from this perspective, like how do we, when those other industries open their doors, how can you help them, you know? So, because it's like, I look at it from those two sides, and it's really weird to, if you ask 12-year-old me how I would imagine what the future would look like, I wouldn't think that we'd be locked in our houses, and 2, I wouldn't think, you know, because of a horrific situation like this, and 2, I wouldn't think that I would be one of the people trying to run a business and help other people all at the same time like a crazy person, because like most of the time I'm like doing all these side hustles but they're never for me. They're never, that's the weird thing is like my wife can't get mad at me most of the time because she's like, well, it's just for you, but it's not for you in a sense, it's like for everything else. So
well, and even like what you said, we were talking on last week's show a little bit about you know, comic shops and whether comic shops, just to kind of look at the industry that we all love. A lot of us get our comics, if we're not getting them digitally, we're getting them at a local store. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I know a lot of local stores are worried about what's going to happen when they do open back up. And there's no content, there's no printed content, there's nothing that they can really promote that would be new. But if you have, you know, local support, if you have contributors, if you have, you know, projects like this that are out there, you know, that brings a little bit of, you know, it brings a little bit more excitement back into the industry. It gives a lot of, you know, people something else that they can look forward to, whether it's digitally or, you know, for these local comic shops, maybe something that they would be able to carry. Like you mentioned with your previous Kickstarter, being able to print on demand, it gives them something that, you know, they can't just get anywhere else and be able to get like that copy. But that's really awesome. And let's see, a light question,
Okay.
kind of off into another arena. What, when you were a kid, kind
Okay.
of going back to what Bill was talking about, getting into comics and all that, what was your favorite either comic genre or comic series that you just, you couldn't wait until you had, your lawnmower money, your lawn cutting money to go and spend it all on at the local store?
Okay. Man. So I think like the one book series that I grew up with, and I think it was because my dad and my uncles had a majority of them, and they were just kind of gifted to me, was Howard the Duck. So I had a ton of Howard the Duck books, and I still do. Like that's one of my almost complete collections. At one point in my life, we had to go to a comic book show, had to sell off a couple of the key issues of the really good covers, the ones that would fetch like gas money and stuff like that. But not for me, for the family. So I have to go find those, but it gives me something to do. Yeah. Spinner rack favorites would have to be G.I. Joe books, and because I don't know what it was. I think it was just like I grew up at that time when that was like G.I. Joe was on TV. You had the toys there. You could it was like fully acceptable to play with these little dolls, and you can make them do whatever you wanted all over the place, and that was what it was. But the other thing was Spider-Man. Like there's something about Spider-Man. When I was a kid, I think every kid finds one superhero that they really like, and that's the thing that I don't know. I wouldn't say like I ran around dressed up like Spider-Man, but I was always climbing trees. I was like climbing on stuff all the time. My parents would find me doing dumb things. I think I didn't break it. I fractured my wrist jumping from chair to chair. I jumped through my neighbor's antique 100-year-old like wicker chair. I hate wicker furniture to this day. I hate it with a passion. If I see wicker furniture, done. I just can't have it. Like no wicker furniture. But yeah, I jumped through this wicker chair, did a number on the wrist. They were so mad. They didn't even care that I like messed up my hand. They're like, get out of the house.
You've destroyed our chair.
Exactly. I was just playing Spider-Man. So I go home and my dad looks at me and my arms like this. And he's like, Spider-Man? I'm like, no. Hospital trip. So no
Spider Greg's one weakness, wicker furniture.
It always gets me.
Damn that rattan.
Stupid.
That Papa San chair without the cushion, I can't stand it.
Have you ever
saved because you told a podcast full of gays that you destroyed antique furniture, and we were all like, oh my goodness. Like, oh. So good save, excellent save.
I love other antique furniture. Like if you look around the house, everything is fine except for the wicker furniture. And like even the Wicker Man movie. I mean, I love Nicolas Cage, but I just can't watch it.
It's fair. It's very fair.
Oh man. Oh no, that's awesome.
I just want to say officially in my universe that film doesn't exist.
Okay.
Oh,
there's only one
original version only.
Oh my god. It's one of the films that still scares the shit out of me.
Is it? It was Michael Caine?
No. It was Edward Woodward, and then
okay.
Christopher Lee was probably the biggest name actor in the rest of the cast. Still scared. There's something about 70s horror that scares me more than anything else.
It's so drawn out, the suspense.
Yeah. And also it's just like the filters they used for film were just creepy. Like even a movie like The Conversation, which isn't a horror movie, almost feels like a horror movie because of the time it was made.
Black Hole, the Disney film, like freaks me out because of some of the filters and stuff, especially at the end when it's all lit by the fireballs and the ethereal, bizarre colors of the black hole itself. Like, that's such a okay. So if
if you look around the house, I have a lot of black hole stuff, not because I love it, but it scared me. And it was one of those movies that my mom made me watch so that I knew that it would end, so I wouldn't be scared of it. She did the same with The Exorcist. She did the same with like, I want to say like Cujo and a bunch of the other horror movies that she made me watch as a child.
Well, after watching Cujo, were you terrified of Red Number 5? Because that was like the start of the movie where, and that does terrify me. The dog, yeah, it was kind of scary and everything, but it was the beginning where those kids. The whole point was that the father was a marketing engineer or marketing director or something, where kids were getting sick from this food coloring, and they were just sick everywhere. And I was just sort of like, I looked around and I'm like, what did I eat for breakfast? Oh my God, am I gonna get? And it's just like, no, it's a movie about a dog with rabies. No, it's poison. We're being poisoned by colorings.
But the food coloring, though, some people do have adverse reactions. My wife does. She ate some candy, all of a sudden, like boom. I was like, what's going on? It was the coloring in the candy.
Well, and when King wrote it, there was like a real scare of some coloring. It was either yellow, it might have been yellow number 5 or red number 2 or something like that. It was actually having allergic reactions for kids or something. I think that was part of the inspiration for that. But that was what I took away from Cujo. Was food coloring poisons you. I grew out of that.
It will.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for the image of Spider Greg
breaking furniture,
smashing through wicker furniture.
Okay, Greg, just as a point of interest, the people you're talking to, I'm in New Jersey, Caleb's in Arkansas, Steve is in North Carolina, and Bryan's over now. Sorry, Washington State. I almost said so where are you located?
All right, so I'm located in the state of Washington as well. So Pacific Northwest.
Hell yeah.
I did grow up out on the East Coast, so in just outside of New Haven, Connecticut.
Oh.
So spent
That's
my
Steve
first 12
too.
years.
Yeah.
I grew up in Glastonbury.
Oh, all right, cool.
Yeah.
Meriden.
Ooh, Meriden.
Oh, yes.
The only thing I know about Meriden is that there's a sex store called In the Mood, because they always ran the commercials. In the Mood in Meriden.
Oh God!
Is it by the Meriden Square?
I think it is the Meriden Square and like the Chevy dealership.
Yes. The two things that if you're in Meriden, you get off the turnpike, you go to Meriden Square, the Chevy
then
dealership.
buy some lingerie.
There you go.
They had commercials for an adult store?
Yeah,
it was like regular radio or TV?
TV. It was a very local, family run adult sex shop.
Family run, family owned.
Yeah.
The one I always have
tasteful.
to explain to people, the one I always have to explain to people really existed was Wine and Roses, which was a combination florist shop and liquor store.
Amazing.
And their tagline was for when you're really in the doghouse. But
makes sense.
I would love to see those commercials again. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Greg, are you in the Seattle area or where are you out of?
So I'm in historic Kent. So just outside of Seattle. Yeah,
nice.
So Seattle area. So
Very
yourself?
Cool. I'm in
Yourself,
Shoreline, North City. I just moved here in February and I'm so happy. I love it.
Welcome. You came at the right time. Look at that. You got here. Pandemic
I could
happened.
not have timed it better because I came from Florida.
Oh, wow. Look at that is great. You moved to a place that actually they went and they said, hey, you know what? We're gonna do all these things.
Yeah, I brag about what we do here so much. It probably is obnoxious at this point.
Come to Seattle and never leave.
Well, it was okay. So one of my friends came from the East Coast to go to. She's gonna come to Emerald City, and we had gone to C2E2, and we were both tabling there, and then she flew back with me, and she was gonna stay with some friends and stuff like that in the area. And as the week went by, I was like, you might get stuck here. And she's like, oh no, everything's fine. And like the next week, like the convention gets canceled. And I was like, so the convention's canceled. My wife and I are going to do a thing at our store. if you want to come down to the shop, you can like set up a table and stuff like that and try to make some money. And then like we were gonna do that, and then like the next day it was like or like 2 days later it was like, oh yeah, they're locking everything down. You can still come and hang out at the store and anybody that comes in, but we're not going to advertise.
What store is it? Is it a comic shop?
It's called the Retro Emporium. It's a it's a little bit of everything. So we have a little bit of.
Oh my God, those ears perked up. Okay.
So you see everything behind me? Behold. So it is. I would say it's pop culture, retro pop culture from your 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. You've got movies, music, comics. All your not comics in the sense of superhero comics. We do all the strange and weird oddball stuff. So all of your movies, all of your TV shows, your random tie-ins and stuff like that, the stuff you get, those 4 issues that came on a cereal box that you're like, where do I find that at? We've got those 4 issues. You're looking for that weird that I want to say, what is it? The Police Academy comic book series. We've got it. You know, you want that ElfQuest books? We've got it.
Oh my God, that sounds like a treasure trove. We'd all love to dig through.
Yeah.
We right before the whole entire pandemic, we went and picked up a whole lot of like a giant record collection, and we turned this area into a record store area. Very see this edge. I was admiring that earlier.
Yeah.
It was a little bit of we had a homage to Empire Records going on.
Nice.
in the shop, and it was much akin to my wife worked at a record store when she was younger, and I worked at a video game store. So we joked that we would never turn the store into that, but it's kind of turned into it because we got the video games, we got the records, the music, the movies, all that stuff. So hence, like, I've got all these movies hanging out that I got to watch later.
Nice. I mean, you have to do the research.
You have to watch.
Yeah.
Have to watch them. Yeah. Have to. It's a terrible job.
So much work.
And then so we're kind of pivoting. We had built a mini arcade in the back so that people could come and play arcade games.
Wow.
So I've been collecting a bunch of. It was my sweet way of picking up all those machines that I always wanted, and Hearst as well. So I was like, oh hey, I really wanted to get Super Hang-On as a kid because I could never play it as a child because everyone else was always playing it, and all the bigger guys wanted to get on there and ride the motorcycle, and I'm like, hey mister, can I play the motorcycle game? They're like, get out of here. So finally I bought my own, but so excited to have that. And she bought a Miss Pac-Man, and once you buy one, you'd start buying. You get more, and so we've got a couple others, and
Wow.
But with the change up of how things are, social distancing and stuff like that, we might probably have to do away with the back room.
Oh.
So it just means I have video games now. I'm just joking.
That's a tax write-off. Yeah.
It does feel like a giant clubhouse right now because, we're doing all the shipping out of the store, and selling stuff out of so it's like just going down there and hanging out playing video games.
It's a rough life. That's right. Tough quarantine, right? Yeah.
Would you say clubhouse or more playhouse?
Well, the playhouse is at home. It's kind of like the BK Kids House or Kids Club. So
Wow, that
or the Honeycomb Hideout.
Oh my God.
So, Greg, I kind of have to ask. We've talked about you getting into comics and everything. What got you into the weird and the retro toys and books and stuff? Like, what took you down that route to want to be a retailer in that scope?
So, my family's a bunch of hoarders. Level 7. Partially joking, partially true. But so when my wife and I started dating, see, I'm with people, my people. You're right there.
Very much so.
So my wife and I, when we first started dating, one of the things that we started talking about back in the days of MySpace was, do you want to go to a thrift store? And would you be opposed to that? And I was like, no, let's go do that. That sounds like that's right up my alley. That's like that's where I get all my good stuff. And little did she know I had a storage unit full of good stuff. That also sounds kind of weird because I've been watching a lot of you. Like I just finished it, and he had a storage unit full of good stuff too. Weird stuff. Anyways, anyways, we start hitting thrift stores and start buying up things, and we joke that we could probably actually sell this stuff, and we start upcycling things and start going to small shows, mom and pop like craft shows, and upcycling. We started doing a lot of upcycling, making things out of everything else and selling them. And people really liked it, and a lot of what we did was just that. And a lot of stores, small stores, started to ask her if she would come in and merchandise, or if she would sell her stuff at the stores, if we could come in and do stuff for them, because we would just go in and just have a good time. And over like the last 12 years, she started to do a lot of conventions and doing comic book shows. And it was kind of weird because at that same time, I'd been writing, but I hadn't been doing the comic books at the time. And so I was always known as the guy who moves the boxes, the guy who has the hand truck, the guy who will always help someone do whatever, because that's usually who I was for all like the time when she was doing all the shows at the beginning. So oh, Greg, could you help us set this table up? Could you help us put this grid wall up? Oh yeah, sure, no problem. I got the clippers, I got the Leatherman tool, let's do that. So we're I'm all like a whirling dervish helping people set up and everything, and come back, and we're all done, and people just knew us from that circuit. And then all of a sudden the comic book drops, and everybody's like, wait, you wrote this thing? So it was funny because like I'm out there selling books next to her in another booth. But we do like last holiday season, about a year ago, she's doing a pop-up at a local bookstore, and she's selling her stuff, selling board games and other stuff that she's gone out and collected. And she's anything that was like too big to sell online, and a lot of the small stuff that'd be great for stocking stuffers. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the guy that runs the bookstore was like, why don't you just open a store? You should just open a store. You know what you're doing. People like everyone that's come in has come in because they knew you were going to be here. Like you already know how to get people in. You just open a store, and I'm pretty sure you could do this. And she's like, I don't know, it's so difficult. Like how it's got to be so hard. You got to get like all these things in line and to do. And it's one of those things that we just didn't think it was possible. That night we decided to walk down the street. We see like there's 4 storefronts that are kind of open, and we kind of like, we didn't think anything of it. But the next day we walked down the street, and it was like light out. And we saw this one that had like this great coloring. It was like orange wall and a like a mint green wall. And it called to us. It said, this is the store that you need to look at. And so we called the number, and the lady, she's like, oh yeah, sure, I'll come down after I get, I got another appointment. And she shows up, and she just like got done doing yoga or whatever. And she's like in her yoga clothes, and she's like, oh yeah, come in and check out this store. It's really funky. And we took a look at it, and it smelled funky for sure, because it had been like vacant for a year, but it was exactly what we were looking for. Mm-hmm. I mean, it had this like really cool looking paint on the wall, and it had this like orange color, and it looked like anyone else that wanted to rent this space would never rent it because it was too much work, but it was perfect for what we wanted. And we were like, how much does this cost? And she tells us, and we're like, oh, there's no way we'll put a business plan together and your people will take a look at us and say yes. 2 days later, we're signing a lease. So and it was crazy because like, we're not, like I said, we both come from retail backgrounds, and just like hustling and stuff like that. But she'd worked as a manager for for music store, video store, doing that for many years, and myself just doing all the weird things that I do. But we just put everything into it, like, just like took a couple weeks and just threw it all into it, and then opened up the store. And it's so weird as you look back, and like a year before, the store was like, all the pictures of the store did not look like it looked like it was like a pop-up setup store that somebody would like, oh, hey, this looks really cool. It's a really neat idea. I wonder how long it'll last. And then to what it looks like now, it's like a kind of like a foundation staple piece. We still have customers that they're calling us, or like, not, I guess, well, they're calling the store. They're messaging, they're sending DM messages, and they're asking, when we're going to do another event. We've been holding movie nights and stuff like that with people, with customers and stuff, so we can stream movies together and watch together, do watch parties and stuff. Because surprisingly, I actually have people that like us. It's kind of weird. We were doing video game nights before, and doing rock band nights, and we were actually having people come out and like wanted, you want to play video games? Yeah. What are you guys playing? We're gonna play Rock Band. Wait, you guys have a whole like Rock Band kit? Yeah, we're gonna like bring it all out. I love karaoke. I want to play Rock Band. That's awesome. So you get people just coming out and just hanging out for like 4 hours playing, Rock Band. So
I gotta say, when you said early on in the courtship, there was that conversation of, do you want to go to a thrift store? I can speak for the majority of my co-hosts. We are partnered with people that don't have that gene, so I'm jealous.
Well, but funny enough, my partner is very much does have that gene, and he's the one who goes off to thrift stores like all the time and comes back with, the green, like the green glass kind of cooking things, and the those old fashioned sort of salt shakers, or really just cool, wacky things. But I would never want to go and dig for it, but he finds those things. I don't know how.
That's like the fun though, is like the dig. I don't know, like the two of us, we also have our very like different things that we look for. She loves getting like the I would say all of the paper goods that usually get lost and destroyed and stuff like that. So she finds all that stuff, like all the maps and the pieces of the books that are the inserts that, and the old Life magazines, and like we like going to estate sales and finding that kind of stuff. Actually found one of the 66 Batmans, like Batman
the Life magazine.
Yeah. I'm like, yeah, this isn't going into the shop. This is going into my collection.
It's ours.
It lives here. But she just has that thing, and she loves like office supplies, and I love typewriters. So it's that's a little fist and glove, if you will. So like, we get some of those things where, like, it's like, how can you say no to this typewriter? It's so beautiful. It goes really good on this cool thing that you have with all these other cool things. Okay, let's buy the typewriter. And now we have 20. No, I'm just joking.
You're joking. It's 19.
Exactly, 19.
Let's say, okay, Greg, in terms of points of contact on the interwebs, where would people go to find you, whether it's your shop or comics or anything else?
All right. So personally, you can find me at That Amazing Twit on Twitter and on Instagram. You can find me also at GK Wordsmith on Twitter and on the aforementioned Facebooks. I don't know if we said that before, though. Maybe not. But that's my that's where you can find me and my writing stuff. Junior Braves of the Apocalypse you can find at most of your local comic book stores. You could also find that on Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com. It's published by ONI Press, and we didn't even talk about Junior Braves of the Apocalypse.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
That's next time.
But
that's too much fun.
That's a book that I that's how I got it. That's actually how I got into comics. And then you can find all of our stuff that you can find when we started doing the fundraiser for Heroes Need Masks. You'll find that I'll be posting about it on all of the things that we do. So you'll find it at That Amazing Twit. You'll find it at GK Wordsmith. You'll find it at probably at Narrative Gunslingers. You'll find it at everything that Spoilerverse does. You'll find it on Funny Book Forensics. I keep wanting to call it Last Podcast because that's what it used to be called, but we've changed it. And GK Wordsmith on Facebook. So you'll find it in all those places. I'll probably make a TikTok video and put it up on TikTok too.
Okay, great. Thanks. Well, we really appreciate you coming on. What we do for the remainder of the show when we do have interview shows is we talk about, we can't say current comics right now because of the lockdown, but you're more than welcome to join us.
Which comics are you talking about? Do you have a list?
I'm
just joking.
Yeah.
Are they cool? Because if they're not cool, I don't want to stay.
Is it Marvel or is it DC or is it none of the above?
Mine's none of the above.
Mine's none of the above, influenced by the other two, though.
None of the above. Okay, I'm liking how this is going. I might stick around.
All right, great.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
So we'll let you. We'll let you go
button.
at the end just to get a flavor of how we go about this. We might have to shut Steve up because he goes on a bit sometimes. Yes, you really did talk 32 minutes about Dragonfly and Dragonfly Man #1. 32 minutes.
It was good.
All right. But you're still my lucky charm. So Steve, why don't you go first? Tell us about a book you're reading.
Well, I'm gonna keep it for like 30 seconds. So, well, maybe 30 seconds plus several minutes. So I read finally the first volume of Aftershock's Alters. It was written by Paul Jenkins, drawn by Layla Lays, and had colors from one of my favorites, Tamara Bonvillain, with words by or letters by Raina Hill. It's a very interesting thing. I mean, it's basically, it follows some pretty common ground in that there is a phenomenon where people all over the world are just developing superpowers, and they're calling themselves alters. When they go through their transition and start, exhibiting these powers, what's interesting is that it tends to raise the attention of two opposing groups. One is a supervillain called Mr. Matter, and the other one is a sort of maybe a more positive, helpful group called the I've just forgotten the name of it, but basically a helpful group that comes in to hopefully save or protect the alters, keep their their normal civilian identities secret, so that they can keep them safe from Mr. Matter. Mr. Matter, on his hand, tends to either kill immediately the alters or bring them into his group. But the main first chapter, the first volume, concerns itself with a young alter who's just coming into her own, called Chalice, who in real life is Charlie, who is a boy, well, maybe not a boy, but a young man who is also transitioning from male to female. And so it's an interesting situation where he's struggling to keep his superhero identity secret, and at the same time figure out how he's going to be able to come out to his family and his friends as a woman. And it's very interesting because as a superhero, Charlie is fully female, and in her sort of family life, living with her family, she presents as male. But it's a really interesting story. It really shows the transition, how difficult it is for somebody to go through a real transition while also going through a very supernatural, very extraordinary transition as well. And as she comes into her powers, she also comes into her confidence, and takes a few more steps closer to coming out to her family. And it's very great. There's a lot of young superhero sort of coming into her own, but then also a very personal story here. And if you get the first volume, Paul Jenkins has a lot to say in the back matter. In the individual issues themselves, there were I wouldn't say letters pages, but there were interview pages where he talked with different people that he brought in to get their opinion, to get some experience and some, some help in creating this character. Because as he says, as Paul Jenkins says, I'm just some, straight middle-aged white dude. What do I know about, what do I know about the trans community? And he wanted to make sure that he was doing it justice. There's also some good disabled representation in this as well, and a lot of diversity in in an amazing way. And it's not forced; it's very natural, and it's a great introduction to this universe that Paul and Layla have created. So, Alters Volume 1, and I believe Volume 2 and 3 are also available from Aftershock Press.
All right, cool. Bryan, tell us about something you're reading.
So I had to go back and like dig through all my stuff, and I just lost something there. Speaking of, not speaking of, but we talked about cons earlier, and here, Emerald City being canceled. So I was thinking about the recent news about Heroes being canceled, and I was like, oh, you know what? I remember getting some stuff from Heroes. I should trot that out and see. And then my boyfriend Brandon reminded me that we had stopped and talked to this cartoonist named Cameron Lucente, and picked up his 21 and Alone. I don't know, or 22. Sorry, 22 and Alone. Did anyone else at Heroes? Did you see him? Did you pick this up? He was kind of in the back. It may have been like he could have been easily missed. It's black and white, self-published, but I am really impressed. I was impressed when we looked at his stuff, at the show, of course, and he was super cute, super nice. His mom there with him, like the whole thing was so. It was right. He had enamel pens. Like I was genetically coded to stop and at least talk to this person. So what this is kind of his formative adolescent years catalog, sort of an Adele, album with a certain age style, So he has poetry, he has sketches, he has some panel-based storytelling. But it is very insightful for me because it talks to the issue of depression, something that I have not struggled with myself, but several of people around me in various times in my life have. And it's always been a struggle for me to understand what their actual struggle, my struggle is whatever. Their struggle is like really, challenging for them. And so what Cameron does in this book is really give you an insight into what depression does for him and how he has dealt with it over the years growing up and coming out and dealing with all of the things that a lot of the people in this audience, obviously, and people listening could relate to. So really highly recommend it. It's available on his website, which is mancameron.com. And I'm reaching out to him on Facebook to see if we can link him up and do all that good stuff too. But, if you really want a good little indie book, I mean, as indie as you get, self-published is pretty impressive, right? In this day and age, and it's good quality. I mean, he really did a good job. He's got some back matter. I mean, all the things you would kind of want from a trade. But it's sort of a mix of things that he has done. So it's not just one story. So that can be good or bad depending on what you're looking for. But yeah, mancameron.com, Cameron Lucente, really good stuff. I hope you guys check it out.
Okay, over to Caleb. Tell us about something you're reading.
So I'm going to be the one that goes towards the mainstream, which is kind of unusual for us a little bit. I talk about a lot of the indie stuff most of the time, but before I do that, I want to kind of. Were any of y'all friends of the show The Americans?
Oh my God.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I thought so. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't mistaken in that. So if you like the show The Americans,
I don't think like was the word.
Love.
Yeah.
If it brings
a practical sexual relationship, I think that Bill had with this show.
So if you
you maybe should want to listen to some of the older episodes to get a flavor of that.
If you dig that, there's a kind of a one shot that I think you will enjoy because it has some of the same tones and themes of the Americans, and it comes from Marvel of all places, which is not something that you would really, you would expect to see. I certainly wasn't. And that book is none other than Road to Empire, number one, and this is a really fun comic that kind of set up an event. And I know everybody, boo event fatigue. Everybody's kind of over that, but but I'm looking forward to this event, and I can't wait for comics to kind of kick back up and go, because this event's going to be centered around a group that I fell in love with because I was the direct kind of the person that they were aiming at with the Young Avengers. But it doesn't have the Young Avengers in it. It's kind of setting up the road for our boy Hulkling Teddy to become a major player in the Marvel universe, and it's written by Robbie Thompson, drawn by Matea De Luis, I think is how you pronounce his name. I'm not sure if it's Luis or Luis. It's got colors by Javier Rodriguez, and Alvaro Lopez does some flashback sequences in it. And if you read, I don't know if any of you did, if you read Robbie Thompson's Meet the Skrulls, the little mini series he did, basically what it was a family of Skrulls, kind of in line with what Tom King did with The Vision, where he set up this family who was in hiding, who was living in kind of suburbia, much like the Americans. They were this, they were Skrulls. They infiltrated the planet. They were trying to figure out where and what they needed to watch out for, and they were sleeper agents, so to speak. And it was, a mom, dad, and three girls who were child soldiers. But they were trying to exist. I mean, that miniseries is worth the read. You should go back and check that out. But this picks up where that left off in one issue. And essentially, dad, out of the group, has been killed. The Kree got him. And, they lost one of the daughters, but found her, and they're trying to kind of get their life back together. And one of the daughters at the time was imprisoned. She was kind of thrown in a cell. That they didn't torture her, but she was very much isolated, and it made her think about this eternal war between the Kree and the Skrull, and what are they fighting for? Like, where does this come from? What's the point? Is there a point? And what she lands on usually is just, I think you're just fighting this war because you've always fought this war. And it's a vicious cycle. It has to be broken. And she starts butting heads with the mom, because, of course, the mom is like, she's kind of been steeped in this mindset of, I'm a soldier. I lost my husband, but more than that, I lost my commander. And, you don't let them get away with that. And as they're kind of figuring out where to go next and what to do, they pick up on a trail. They get a clue. And what it leads them to is this old Kree lab that had some science experiments going on. And as they are digging through the stuff, they find a leaf. And this leaf has got a whole mythology born out of it. And it dates back to the very beginning of the Kree Skrull War and what created that animosity. As it turns out, the Skrulls were not always a warlike culture. They were pacifists who set up their empire until they found a planet. And on the planet, there were two different subsets of kind of dominant species. There were a leaf-based society, and there was, of course, the Kree. And they were basically said, hey, like, you guys, we're going to give you all of our Skrull technology, give you a year, you build whatever you want to build, see what you can do, and we'll come back, and whichever one does better, we'll just proclaim you the dominant people on the planet. And imperialism, that's how it tends to work. We'll separate you and give you the tools and see which one we like better, but we'll come back and we'll merge you into the Skrull Empire. And the Krees take off. They actually go to the moon, of all places, to the dark side of the moon. They build this giant metropolis. Wonder what that could lead to and be. And they just kind of advance very mechanically, very methodically. But the leaf-based creatures, they don't do that. They go to where they're wanting to establish, and they build this kind of mecca for plants. It's a very peaceful society. They just kind of they build, they grow, they invent, they create beautiful things. And when I think I may be breaking up a little bit. I'm sorry. Um, when the scrolls come back, they see this very peaceful garden that's been built up around this culture, and they say, okay, this is exactly what we wanted. But of course the Kree are not having that. The Kree are they just go full in and they destroy everything, and that starts the Kree Scroll War. And out of that, you get this insane history of Captain Marvel. You get Earth coming into the mix. Um, the Watcher, of course, gets involved. There's just this beautiful history splayed out in, I think, 32 pages that really just I loved. I absolutely adored it. And I'm not a cosmic person. I normally don't care about Marvel's cosmic side of the world. And where this is going to culminate at is Teddy Altman fulfilling his legacy that was built up through Young Avengers. He's going to take his place on the throne, and he's going to unite the two kingdoms. And they're coming for Earth, whatever that means. We don't know yet, and when comics kick off, we'll find out. But he's coming to Earth, and he's bringing hell with him. So I'm curious to see where this goes. So if you're into that, if that sounds good, when you can get your hands on it, do download it from Comixology. It's a good time.
All right, thanks. So the books I want to talk about, I actually stem from my putting DC first all the time, and I did start reading this series, and I kept collecting it, but I'm years behind. When you factor in all of the series and the ancillary miniseries that have generated out of this, a couple of I would say about like at this point like 3 months ago, I read Justice League Black Hammer #1, and I thought, well, I could get through this, even though I'm so far behind on Black Hammer. And there were like 3 pages in, I saw that there were 1 or 2 references where it's like, all right, maybe I should wait just so I get the whole picture. So I started, uh, what is a reread and then read because I'm so far behind. So I hit Black Hammer. I hit the 2016 to 2000, started the 2017 issues. For people who don't know what's going on in Black Hammer, book is written by Jeff Lemire with art by Dean Ormston, and this I did not know about. Dean Ormston had a stroke, and most of it, like some of the substantial delays were for him to recover. They actually intended for this series to come out in 2014 and was delayed while he recovered. I did not know about that. But Black Hammer, again, it's one of those worlds where that there are analogs for various superheroes. There's an analog for Captain America in Abraham Slam. There's an analog for Mary Marvel, an analog for Martian Manhunter, and it goes on and on and on. I think the quickest way to describe this series is Astro City on mescaline, because it does take some very twisted turns with playing with the superhero genre. What goes on in Black Hammer is there are a group of heroes that inhabited a city called Spiral City, and there was a crisis level event. Though they did apparently win the event, they ended up trapped in this town called Rockwood, which is this Twilight Zone-ish, almost time stand still scenario in this town. Black Hammer comes from the name of one of the heroes that was with them, who actually tried to escape and died in the attempt. So this team, who across the board people don't get along, aren't are here we go with the Americans, are posing as a family on Black Hammer Farm in the area, and it goes through their stories in both flashback and a forward narrative that moves forward about how they are dealing with life in the present day, and also what brought them to this place. And I'm just loving it. I mean, I got through, I want to say, like the first 4 or 5 issues initially, and then went in the box, and I'll get to it. You know, there's a new issue of Red Hood Outlaw I've got to get to first. So this has given an opportunity, though I'm like still kind of pressed for time in terms of how many hours I'm spending on the job remotely. I am dedicating some time to whittle that indie boxes and boxes down. And this was one where I'm just going to keep going till I get caught up to present day. And I know Caleb digs it. So, and Steve's giving me the thumbs up. And I really wish I didn't get so far behind in this because I'm loving the ride.
It's a great series. I didn't know what to expect, and several people had talked about it really positively, but Lemire's stuff can be like, you know, really great or kind of okay. So this yeah.
There's always a dark twist, and it's either a dark twist that pulls you in or pushes you away. I found. Yeah.
Well, in this it allows him to kind of explore that sort of darker, you know, Twilight Zone you said about the town, but I think it in general the way that a lot of his characters interact and the fates that befall them tend to be in that sort of sad twist of fate or, you know, unfortunate event. But he also combines it with his love of superheroes and you know, some classic eras, the Silver Age and whatever. And so you get these really fleshed out characters that you've just been introduced to, but you feel like you've known them forever.
Yeah.
It's completely his love letter to pop culture.
You're right. And I think specifically American pop culture, because I think, you know, just along the lines like in the 80s by some of the best comic commentary came from the British writers and artists. I think because it is through the Canadian lens that there is a vitality to that particular commentary that I don't think you would necessarily get with somebody homegrown.
Yeah,
so
it's a different kind of
something else I take away from it.
Yeah, it's a different kind of darkness than what you might get from sort of like a Frank Miller retelling this, or so trying to build the same thing.
So I'm gonna keep plugging away. Hopefully within a month, I'll be through the whole thing.
You'll get there. You'll get to Skull Digger.
I'm doing the Marvel indie flip flop.
Yeah,
Marvel. I'm also like insanely behind. There's so many series I would read like the first 5 issues and then they stack up. So that's what I'm hitting right now. Greg, how about you? Is there anything that you're digging?
You know, I've been I was as you've all been talking, I've been thinking about what can I talk about? You know, I'm gonna jump back in. I know my writing partner Mike Tanner from Junior Bears is gonna love this. I'm gonna brown nose him, and I'm gonna talk about this book that he did on a Kickstarter a while back. It's called Strike Team, codename Diamond Force. It's actually one that if you like grindhouse movies, if you love the old straight to video kind of thing, if that's your jam, you love those like action flicks with big dudes, big guns, getting into trouble, mixing it up with ninjas and all sorts of stuff, then like this is his homage to that. It's loosely based, or it's written in a way that it's a story that was supposed to be a film, that the film was lost after countless changes of hands and fires and studios and other things like that. So it was never released. And the script was found, and he turned it into a comic book. And this is the works that him and I'm gonna butcher his artist name on this. He's from Kolauskux. He's from Poland, and I can't pronounce his last name. But it is I'm gonna show an image of this. If you can see this, it is a fantastically like prison art style. That's what when we were at San Diego Comic-Con a while back last year, people were like, that's that really cool prison art style, and he's like, that's how he draws. So, but it fits. It's exactly what you would imagine, like an art house, or not an art house, a grindhouse movie in a comic book, where essentially it just picks up where these there's these three characters. One is like much like a Magnum PI. One is much like if you had Red Sonja and a robot all on a boat, and they're just out cruising the ocean, and they hear that the president's daughter's been kidnapped by a bunch of ninja warriors who are out trying to get in on all the diamonds, smuggling diamonds across the Pacific Ocean and whatnot. Then they decide they're gonna go and save the president's daughter, and they sneak out there, and it's very much follows that very grindhousey, just all the beats that you would imagine in there. There's big ninja fights. There's the robot that does whatever robots do. And why a robot? It's the 80s, of course. That's why there's a robot on a boat, much like Riptide, or I'm sure in Rocky 3, was it 3? No, 4. Rocky 4. I'm trying to look at my Rocky albums over there, and I'm like, no, it was 3. No, 4. 3. It was 3.
No, it was 4.
It was 4.
It was 4.
It was 4. Okay.
The reason I know this is because I went to see James Brown after that movie came out, and they brought out the friggin' robot. And no lie, living in America is 25 minutes long.
Oh my God.
So, and the robot was just going around in this figure 8 for the whole 25 minutes.
I love it. Oh my gosh. I don't know what it was. We just love robots back. We still love robots now. But I mean, we also thought the robots would be much bigger than they were. Now they're these little things that just like, clean up stuff on the floor or make bigger messes. I don't know. But I'm derailing. The book itself is fantastic. The art is great. He had creators put in really cool ads and stuff like that for TV shows and toys that don't exist, a video game that never was made. There is even the movie print from the movie that was supposed to be the prequel. It's so cool. He really put a lot of thought into it. And I was like, you've been doing all this over here, and we're doing all this over here. Just take my money. It's really fantastic. So it can be found at this website, should know this off the top of my head, bymichaeltanner.com. So it is you can just buy books right off his website and just have them sent to your house or get a digital one. But it's a good one.
Okay. Well, some of us, it's late for some of us here, and it's dinner time for some of the others. So we're going to wrap this episode up. And when we wrap an episode of the Comic Book Bears up, we do so with this segment we call the Woofs of the Week segment, which is where we spotlight something, though it could be a comic book, but often it's a film or a television series, anything under the sun that we think you, fair listener or viewer, may be interested in sampling. And again, this is just usually a very quick round, Greg. I think my favorite analog to this is the what do they call it on the My Favorite Murder?
Fucking hoorays.
Yeah. So Greg, we're nothing if not gracious to our guests. So why don't we start with you? What is your woof of the week?
Right now, I just shotgunned the whole entire series of Outer Banks, and I thought that was like really good. So I'm thoroughly engaged through the whole entire series. Like I just pretty much boom. Fun little TV show on Netflix. So.
All right, cool. Steve, what is your woof of the week?
My woof of the week is a comic book. Well, actually, a graphic novel by legend Will Eisner called The Plot. This is something that I picked up years ago and have just re-picked up because it was such an impressive piece of work. It's for somebody who likes history, somebody who likes conspiracy theories, somebody who has a history with looking at the history of anti-Semitic sociology and the origins of that. Basically, Will Eisner researched a lot of, I would say, modern anti-Semitic literature to come up with this this great, beautifully done history of what's known as the secret protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a wholly, made up work that has influenced and still influences today a lot of alt-right, white supremacist, anti-Semitic politics as well as writings. Even though it is full junk, made up garbage, he does an amazing job of really running it down, where it came from, who the people were who were involved. And it's a beautiful book itself. If you can find it, you can get it most places, I think. Carry it either online or in stores if and when they open up for you.
Okay, moving over to Bryan. Bryan, what is your wolf of the week?
There again, I had myself muted. I'm so good at this now, right? So I had, just before this, I was listening to a live stream on Twitch of my friends that run Circuit Church back in Orlando. Circuit Church is a modular synthesizer-based community of artists that sort of collaborate and do their own stuff. And when I was in Orlando, I used to go to their events. They had hands-on training sessions at the local Family Lab facility. They had classes on how to put together modules, how to wire everything up, performance spaces, like all this cool stuff. They just did their first modular on the spot in Orlando back in February that I missed, which was really sad, but it's all right. There's a great modular community here in Seattle, so I'm not worried about missing out. But I just wanted to give them a plug. I'm wearing their shirt. There it is. So yeah, Circuit Church is all up on Twitch, but you can go and find them on Facebook at Circuit Church. They have cassette tapes. I actually have bought for the first time in 20 plus years little cassette tapes for listening on some random cassette player that we actually happen to have. And
what are cassettes?
Yeah, Greg knows. He's probably got a whole section for old cassettes, right?
I do.
Of course. No, it's fascinating. The world of modular synthesis is fascinating, and I am a very, very, very basic bitch when it comes to putting my own stuff together. So someday maybe you'll hear it. We'll see. But yeah, modular community, Circuit Church, check them out.
All right. Over to Steve. I'm sorry, over to Caleb. Caleb, what is your wolf of the week?
The other Steve.
Yeah.
No, so I want to send a wolf out. I'm actually going to send it way over to the West Coast. A buddy of mine works at a kind of, they're not really a chain. I don't think that's fair to call them. I think they have 2 stores, but it's a record store. It's called Amoeba Music. They have one in Berkeley. They got one out in San Francisco. They're big in the Bay Area. They do a lot of work, put on a lot of concerts. As you might imagine, they got hit hard by not being able to be open. They have had to, they've tried to do what they can to make sure they take care of their employees. Like I said, one of them is a really good friend of mine, but unfortunately, when you're not able to have people coming in your shop, you don't need that many people there. They're still working mail order to try to keep the store staying open, but it hasn't been good, like a lot of small businesses. So what they've done is they've launched their own GoFundMe, like a lot of places have, and they've had to do. And so I know everybody's kind of tight on funds right now, but if you have a little bit of extra, you want to send some to a good cause, keep a local business open. And I'm saying this as somebody who's in Arkansas. I don't benefit from this at all. I don't even get to go any of the cool concerts, but they have amazing concerts. They're big into their local music scene. And they have a lot of like records and stuff that you really can't find anywhere else. They respect music of all sorts, be it, lo-fi, hip hop, just whatever, metal. They've got it all. So I'm gonna send the GoFundMe link. I'll send it over to you, Bryan, so you can attach it to everything else. And yeah, send them what you can. Keep a local indie shop. I mean, music shops are not prevalent anymore. Downloading did what it did, and so support it where you can, and send some love to them. That's Amoeba Music out in the West Coast. So
Amoeba Music is the type of store where you could find the Witchblade soundtrack.
nice.
We talked the other day.
What?
Awesome.
Yeah, no, they did. There was a soundtrack to the comic book by Witchblade, which was done by members of principally Skinny Puppy and Babes in Toyland. And I talked about it on SFG, so that's why I wanted to show Caleb.
Oh, crazy.
That's
Oh, wait.
Like-
Caleb's bringing something.
awesome.
Show and tell. Okay, cool.
Oh.
Well, you know, one thing we talked about with you know, Steve and I have an ongoing thread with our friend Tito, and you know, one thing that he mentioned that I think is really lost on some people, which is, you know, now he's, you know, again, Amoeba is, you know, one thing that you didn't talk about is that they're closing the one Los Angeles store. They had already planned to move to another, but there was no farewell with that. And you know, something that we went through though, for those of us that would meet up for concerts or theater in New York, you know, very often, I call him my straight concert husband, Tom Moynihan. You know, that we would very often meet up at if Virgin, if it was Midtown, and Tower if it was downtown, and that dynamic isn't available anymore in a lot of places. And I wish it was, because there was something very special about that, where you were biding time waiting for somebody, and like, you know, might end up in like, oh fuck, I'm going to a concert and I got like, holy shit, I gotta take with me. But it's missed. It's definitely missed. My woof of the week goes out to something that started before we were all born. Okay. I can't call this a binge because there's 1,225 episodes of this friggin' thing. But somehow I got hooked. Dark Shadows. I've never watched it because I was scared, because I know rabbit holes, just like original art and just like a bunch of other things, you know, just like fantasy football, getting involved in that again. I'm scared of rabbit holes, but I can see how this series hooked people in. My mother actually, when the show was on, she actually changed, and she and one of her best friends at work changed their schedule at the hospital so that they would go to work like 45 minutes earlier, so they could make sure that they were home in time at 4:00 for Dark Shadows.
Awesome.
And I can totally understand that. I haven't even gotten to the Barnabas Collins episodes, who was the vampire who became the central figure and, you know, the star of the show. I'm still in the
Johnny Depp.
Oh Jesus Christ! You know what? Why don't you do that? You have your Johnny Depp and your Nick Cage Wicker Man, and have a nice little film festival. And
I did not bring up Wicker Man.
and maybe, just maybe, Babes in Toyland and Skinny Puppy can do the soundtrack.
I love that soundtrack.
Yeah. But you know, I'm still in the early stages of the show where it's not really supernatural, it's just creepy, just creepy New England people. But
So like real life.
but there is something just so magical about it, and I am really hooked, and I know it's going to take years for me to get through this, but I think I'm going to do. I understand before the show ends, there's a couple of really rocky months. And you know, just seeing the joy of live television, because though there are some cuts and there are some things that were, you know, filmed, you can tell from the microphones in shot, and, you know, people walking into doors and stuff, you know, and doors not closing, you can tell that this was definitely live TV, and this was definitely soap opera acting. But I'm loving it. So Dark Shadows is my woof. And if you want to stream it right now, I know it's on Tubi, and I think it's on some other platform for free, streams for free. So there you go. All right. Well, Greg, thank you so much for joining us. Best of luck with your project, and we'll definitely promote it when we have, you know, when you actually have it gel into the actual campaign. But definitely best of luck to you as the store owner, in terms of weathering this storm. It sounds like Washington State has its shit together a lot better than some other areas of the country. So hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll see you reopen. And it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. So we're going to wrap this one up for real now in a nice Tidy Bow. Again, we are the Comic Book Bears podcast. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears podcast. You can find us on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. I am really thirsty. You can find us, you can download us through iTunes. You can catch us on Stitcher Radio and some of the other podcatching platforms. If you want to write to us, you can do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Billy Z.
I'm Brian Pittard.
I'm Steve Morey.
I'm Caleb Alexander McKenzie.
You're going to hear a woof and an explosion. We'll be back next week. Take care, everyone.